The Zorkal Dominion had conquered countless star systems. They had torn through the fabric of space, quashing civilizations, and leaving nothing but rubble in their wake. For centuries, they were the undisputed rulers of the galaxy. But Earth had eluded them. Whispers among the galactic network had sparked an unsettling curiosity. Earth, a small, insignificant planet orbiting a mediocre star, had earned a reputation, one that made even the Zorkal hesitate. It was known as the Hornet's nest of the galaxy, a place teeming with unpredictable, ferocious life. Tales of its inhabitants, of humans, volatile, aggressive, yet somehow thriving against impossible odds, were passed in hushed tones by those who dared to speak of them. Some said Earth was a trap, a planet so chaotic that even the most advanced civilizations couldn't predict what would happen next. Some claimed the humans were dangerous, wild, and more advanced than they appeared. Others, like Commander Cyrus, dismissed these as myths, nothing more than exaggerated rumors. Commander Cyrus was an efficient, ruthless tactician, accustomed to seeing planets fall with clinical precision. As the Zorkal fleet entered the outskirts of Earth's solar system, he stood in the command center of the flagship, his fingers steepled in front of his face. He had long dismissed the notion that Earth was anything more than a primitive backward world. It was time to put the rumors to rest. "Prepare to enter orbit," Cyrus ordered, his voice calm and collected. "Send a full reconnaissance sweep. I want data on their military, their technology, their defenses. And make it quick." The fleet's sleek, silver ships glided silently into position above Earth, their advanced sensors scanning the surface. Cyrus wasn't worried. The Zorkal had faced much fiercer opponents. Earth's history, if anything, showed a pattern of a young species teetering on the edge of extinction, always surviving against overwhelming odds. But it was nothing the Zorkal couldn't handle. As the fleet's lead ship hovered in Earth's orbit, their scans returned minimal signs of high-tech infrastructure. The surface seemed populated, but primitive. The human settlements were scattered, small cities that appeared less sophisticated than the Zorkal had been led to believe. Military signals were weak, barely a whisper in the vast expanse of space. "See, nothing to fear," Cyrus muttered to his second-in-command, Mylan, who stood beside him. "They are not prepared for us. No shields, no weapon systems capable of resisting us. We'll crush them like insects." "Yes, Commander," Mylan replied, though a flicker of uncertainty passed through his eyes. He had heard the stories too, and the unease in the back of his mind refused to go away. But there was no room for doubt in Cyrus's eyes, only cold confidence. "Commence the landing protocol," Cyrus commanded. The fleet descended toward the desert, their landing zones marked by faint glimmers on their scanners. Earth's atmosphere was dense with strange electromagnetic interference, but it wasn't enough to deter the Zorkal. They were prepared for everything. As their boots touched the dusty ground of Nevada, the Zorkal fleet's armored troops deployed, their movements precise and mechanical. The landscape was vast and empty, save for a few distant buildings and rocky outcroppings. Earth, in its simplicity, seemed like the perfect place to assert dominance. Yet, as the Zorkal moved further into the desert, something seemed off. The air felt thick, the ground beneath their boots heavy with the promise of a hidden, lurking threat. They had underestimated humanity once already, and this time it would cost them. The Zorkal soldiers advanced, their footsteps heavy against the arid earth of Nevada. The desert, sprawling and seemingly empty, gave nothing away. No signs of human life, no activity. It was eerily silent, broken only by the hum of Zorkal technology. Their mission was clear: seize the area, assess any remaining defenses, and prepare for the next phase of invasion. Commander Cyrus had expected little resistance. The humans, after all, were primitive compared to the Zorkal Dominion's vast technological superiority. "Move out. Secure the perimeter," Cyrus ordered over the comms. As the soldiers spread out, they couldn't help but notice the strange stillness of the landscape. The desert was vast, yet there was no sign of wildlife, no distant sounds of vehicles or aircraft. It almost felt too quiet. But Cyrus dismissed the unease. He had seen it all before. Colonies that had failed to defend themselves, civilizations that crumbled before the might of the Zorkel. This would be no different. But then, without warning, the ground beneath their feet shifted. An entire platoon of Zorkel soldiers vanished into a hidden trench, swallowed by the desert as if the earth itself had opened up to consume them. Panic rippled through the ranks as weapons were drawn and heads snapped toward the horizon, but it was too late. Explosions tore through the air. First, it was a series of small detonations, like firecrackers, but they quickly escalated. Zorkel armor shattered under the force of blast waves that seemed to come from nowhere. Hidden explosives, buried deep in the sand, had been triggered by an unseen enemy. Ambush! Ambush! One of the soldiers shouted, but his words were lost in the roar of gunfire. Cyrus, still in the command unit, watched the chaos unfold on his monitors. His jaw clenched as the first of his forces began to fall. Human troops, appearing out of the desert's depths like specters, launched themselves from concealed positions. They moved with astonishing speed, striking without warning, using primitive but effective weapons, hunting rifles, old-fashioned explosives, and homemade drones, but they were more than capable of making the Zorkel feel the sting of battle. Regroup. Cyrus barked, slamming his fist onto the console. Bring up reinforcements. We'll crush them. But the humans weren't retreating. They were closing in. The air around the Zorkel soldiers crackled with tension. The desert now a war zone. Zorkel plasma guns flared, but human soldiers were faster, more agile. They darted between rocks and ruins, firing carefully timed shots that tore through the Zorkel's energy shields. With each strike, the once imposing Zorkel soldiers were pushed back. At the heart of the chaos, a human commander, a man barely older than a teenager, led his squad with uncanny precision. He barked orders to his troops as they continued their relentless assault. He wasn't fazed by the technology or the firepower of the invaders. He was focused only on one thing: survival. Cyrus watched in disbelief. These humans, they weren't just fighting to protect their land. They were fighting to win. With each moment that passed, it became clearer that Earth's defenders were prepared for this, though they couldn't have known the Zorkel were coming. Launch the counteroffensive. Cyrus roared, his voice trembling with frustration. Send in the drones. We'll scorch this entire desert if we have to. A swarm of Zorkel drones buzzed into the air, their weapons primed for destruction. They were powerful, designed to track and neutralize any threats with surgical precision. But when they descended upon the human forces, they were met with a surprise. The humans were waiting. Anti-drone devices, constructed from scavenged alien tech and human ingenuity, sent pulses of electromagnetic interference into the air. The Zorkel drones malfunctioned, spiraling out of control and crashing into the earth like falling meteors. The Zorkel were caught off guard, and for the first time, Cyrus felt something unfamiliar, a flicker of doubt. He had underestimated them. Report, he demanded, his tone seething with anger. Sir, a voice crackled through the comms. We're being pushed back. Our front lines are falling. This was no longer just an invasion. This was war. And the humans were fighting back harder than anyone had imagined. The Zorkel fleet had expected an easy conquest, but as the hours passed, it became clear that they had grossly miscalculated. The humans had not only resisted the initial assault, they were fighting with a fierce, coordinated tenacity that felt almost instinctive. Cyrus paced in the command center, his mind racing. How had Earth's defenders mobilized so quickly? How were they armed with such an array of weapons that rivaled even the Zorkel's advanced technology? The reports from the front lines were dismal. What had begun as a surgical strike to secure the Nevada desert had now spiraled into a full-scale battle. Human resistance had spread like wildfire. It wasn't just Nevada that was burning. From the icy plains of Siberia to the dense jungles of the Amazon, Humanity was fighting back, turning every corner of the planet into a battleground. Xerxes studied the holographic map projected before him, eyes narrowing as human movements flared in areas previously thought neutral. There was no chaos to their response. It was systematic, each region acting as part of a greater whole, a global defense network woven together by something stronger than military command: unity. "We've underestimated them," Commander Milan spoke, his voice betraying the unease that had slowly crept into his demeanor. "Their civilians, farmers, engineers, even teachers, are organizing. It's like they're all suddenly soldiers." Xerxes clenched his fists, the weight of the revelation sinking in. He had assumed humanity's war capabilities were limited to basic survival tactics, but now it was clear that they had been preparing for something much larger, much more organized than expected. As dawn broke over Earth's western hemisphere, something else began to take shape. The human military, once fractured and disjointed, now began to cooperate on an unprecedented scale. Across the globe, cities went dark as secret military installations activated their emergency protocols. Hidden research facilities emerged from decades of secrecy, revealing technological advancements that had been kept from the public eye. The humans weren't just defending. They were evolving adapting faster than the Zorkel could comprehend. In Moscow, a team of engineers successfully reverse-engineered the Zorkel's own technology, turning it against them. By the time Xerxes' forces realized what was happening, human-made fighter jets and drones were streaking across the sky, engaging Zorkel ships with astonishing precision. Ground forces, too, had adapted, using guerrilla tactics to cripple Zorkel supply lines. But it wasn't just technology that made the humans so formidable. Xerxes had misjudged the human spirit, the raw, unyielding drive to protect their home. The Zorkel could crush civilizations, obliterate cities, but they had never encountered an enemy so unrelenting, so determined to survive. "Commander, they're not backing down," Milan said, his voice growing more urgent. "We've underestimated their resolve. We need reinforcements. Now." Xerxes didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared at the screens, watching as human soldiers, outfitted in scavenged armor and armed with modified weapons, pushed deeper into Zorkel-controlled territories. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Earth's people, for all their primitive technology, were not just fighting to defend their planet. They were fighting to win. In the thick of the battle, an unexpected ally emerged. A group of human hackers, working out of hidden bunkers and underground networks, launched a cyber attack against the Zorkel's communications network. The onslaught was so precise and relentless that entire fleets of Zorkel warships were left temporarily blind, their command systems overridden by human ingenuity. This attack crippled the Zorkel's ability to coordinate, and for the first time in the conflict, Earth's forces gained the upper hand. From the safety of his command ship, Xerxes could only watch as his carefully laid plans unraveled in the face of humanity's relentless ingenuity. He was no longer fighting an invasion. He was fighting a war of attrition, one where the Zorkel's technological superiority seemed irrelevant in the face of human persistence. Humanity had awoken, and they were ready to make the Zorkel pay. Commander Xerxes stared at the holographic map of Earth's surface, frustration clouding his judgment. His once confident invasion had spiraled out of control. Reports flooded in, each one more troubling than the last. Human forces had coordinated attacks on multiple fronts, using guerrilla tactics that confused his officers and neutralizing Zorkel technologies with alarming efficiency. It was as if Earth's defenders had been expecting an invasion for years, preparing in secret, waiting for this moment to strike. "We need to adapt," Xerxes muttered under his breath, though it felt more like an admission of defeat than a solution. "We can't keep losing these battles." His second-in-command, Milan, looked at him with concern. "Commander, it may be time to reassess our strategy. Earth's defenses are more formidable than we thought." Xerxes slammed his fist onto the table, silencing Milan's words. He refused to acknowledge the possibility of failure. He wasn't the kind of leader who adapted. He crushed. That's how the Zorkal Empire had become the most powerful force in the galaxy. But this was different. Humanity's response was not only unexpected, but it was relentless. He'd never faced an enemy willing to sacrifice so much just to survive. "Do not question me, Mylan," Gyrus snapped. "We are the Zorkal Dominion. We do not retreat." But even as he said the words, Gyrus knew the situation was slipping out of his grasp. The fleet needed reinforcements, and they needed them fast. Earth had caught them off guard, but Gyrus had no intention of surrendering. If there was one thing the Zorkal were known for, it was their ability to regroup and adapt. Meanwhile, Earth's resistance, a loose coalition of militaries, civilians, and rebel groups, was expanding faster than anticipated. Their most recent victory had taken them deeper into Zorkal-occupied territories, capturing key resources and weapon caches. But Earth's leaders knew that they couldn't defeat the Zorkal alone. If they were to win this war, they would need allies. In secret, a council of global leaders convened. They didn't just need better weapons. They needed intelligence. They needed to understand how the Zorkal operated, what their weaknesses were. Fortunately, Earth had something the Zorkal didn't: underground networks. A small faction of humans had infiltrated the Zorkal ranks, posing as prisoners of war or low-level workers in captured Zorkal colonies. Over the years, these spies had gathered valuable intelligence on the Zorkal's military strategies, supply chains, and weaknesses in their technology. They also had something more dangerous: knowledge of the Zorkal's internal divisions. Earth's resistance forces, realizing the potential of this information, sent a select group of soldiers to make contact with a group of defectors. These Zorkal, disillusioned by the Dominion's cruel treatment of their own kind, were willing to risk their lives to help bring it down from the inside. In an abandoned military facility on the outskirts of Moscow, Earth's high command set up a meeting with a Zorkal informant, an ex-officer who had witnessed the Dominion's most brutal tactics firsthand. The informant, known only as Draxa, had secretly been feeding Earth's leaders intelligence on the Zorkal's war strategy and technological vulnerabilities. "I can't promise you much," Draxa said, her voice low and tinged with fear. "But I know your enemy better than anyone. The Zorkal. They're arrogant, and they'll never expect you to fight like this. Use your unpredictability. It's the one thing they don't understand." Draxa's words were chilling, but there was something else in her eyes: hope. For the first time in what seemed like ages, she believed in humanity's ability to fight back. Meanwhile, Gyrus had made his own decision. He realized that brute force would no longer be enough to defeat Earth. He needed to get inside their resistance, understand their fight. If he could break their unity, he could shatter their will to survive. The Zorkal, too, had their spies. But unlike Earth, Gyrus was willing to play a more dangerous game. The two sides, unknowingly, were now set on a collision course, a confrontation between raw, unsentimental strength and a volatile, unexpected alliance that could change the fate of the galaxy. As Earth's resistance continued to escalate, the pressure on Commander Gyrus grew. His attempts to regain control over the planet had become more desperate, and despite his insistence that the Zorkal would emerge victorious, doubt gnawed at him like an unseen enemy. His fleet, once the epitome of invulnerability, had been battered by Earth's tenacious defenders. The once unassailable Zorkal forces were now scrambling to hold onto their remaining footholds across the planet. Gyrus could no longer deny it. Earth was not the primitive, fractured world he had imagined. It was a force to be reckoned with. "Report," Gyrus growled, his voice strained with impatience. A communications officer, his face drawn with anxiety, turned toward him. "Commander, the human forces are massing. They've taken control of key military installations in Europe, Africa, and South America. Their attacks have become more coordinated, and they're using strategies we haven't encountered before." Gyrus slammed his fist against the armrest of his chair. "I will not be defeated by a ragtag group of civilians and soldiers. We will crush them." increase the pressure on their major cities, leave nothing standing. But as the order left his lips, a deep sense of unease lingered. Something had shifted. Earth wasn't just defending. It was outsmarting the Zorkel at every turn. The resistance was more than just survivalists. It was an evolving, unpredictable force that adapted faster than the Zorkel could handle. Back on Earth, the alliance of global leaders had grown stronger. The defectors, led by Draxa, had shared secrets of Zorkel vulnerabilities, weaknesses in their ship's propulsion systems, flaws in their artificial intelligence, and gaps in their surveillance networks. Humanity's technological edge, which had once seemed insignificant, was rapidly catching up. The first successful strikes on Zorkel warships, using human-made EMPs and sabotage tactics, proved the effectiveness of the intelligence. In the heart of Washington, D.C., President Elena McCarthy stood in front of a makeshift war room, surrounded by military leaders and scientists. Maps and data streams flickered on the walls. "We need to push harder. They're losing ground, but we can't let them regroup. We got one shot at this," she said, her voice resolute. Her eyes shifted to Draxa, who had been advising the humans for weeks. "Tell us what you know about their command structure. What's their weakness?" Draxa, her alien features still bearing the weight of the decision to betray her former comrades, didn't hesitate. "Their leaders, terrorists especially, are arrogant. They underestimate you, and there's a rift within their ranks. Some of them want to abandon Earth altogether, but Cirrus believes that if he can break your will, he'll be able to force you to surrender." President McCarthy nodded. "Then we need to make them doubt Cyrus. We need to hit them where it hurts the most." The plan was set into motion. The resistance forces, bolstered by the Zorkel defectors' information, began an unprecedented offensive. They struck Zorkel supply lines, targeting weak points in their infrastructure, and most importantly, they attacked high-profile Zorkel command centers with surgical precision. Each strike was designed to send a clear message. Earth was no longer just fighting to survive. It was fighting to win. The humans, emboldened by their recent successes, began launching coordinated cyberattacks against Zorkel fleets, temporarily disabling their ships and forcing them into retreat. For the first time in the war, Zorkel warships were forced to flee, not because of overwhelming firepower, but because their own technology had been turned against them. The tide was beginning to turn. Meanwhile, on the Zorkel flagship, Heroism paced restlessly. He had received the reports from his field commanders. The resistance was growing bolder. Their tactics were evolving with each encounter, and the losses were mounting. What had once been an easy conquest had become a battle for survival. In the quiet of his command center, Cyrus allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The humans had surpassed his expectations, but it wasn't too late. If he could rally his forces, crush the resistance's nerve centers, he could still turn the tide. He would remind the humans why the Zorkel Dominion was feared across the galaxy. But even as he prepared for the next wave of attacks, something gnawed at the back of his mind. The resistance, with their unpredictable tactics and alliances, was no longer the hunted. Earth was becoming the hunter. Commander Cyrus was no fool. He had fought and conquered dozens of planets, and though Earth had taken him by surprise, he was not without resources. The Zorkel Dominion was vast, and their fleet, though battered, still outnumbered Earth's combined forces. He had one final gambit left, one that could shift the balance of power back in his favor. But even as he prepared for the final assault, doubt lingered. The humans, with their ingenuity, had proven to be more than just survivors. They were adaptive and relentless. He had underestimated them at every turn, and now they were on the verge of turning the tables completely. "Prepare the main fleet for a full-scale orbital bombardment," Conquerors ordered, his voice cold. "Target their command centers and infrastructure. Wipe their cities off the map. We will break their spirit and force them to surrender." His officers exchanged uneasy glances. The ground forces had already been severely diminished, and the resistance had proved remarkably resilient. But Cirrus would not relent. If the Zorkel could not win through conventional means, then they would break humanity's will through sheer destruction. In response, Earth's leaders were preparing for their own final strike. The war had already cost them too much, but they were not ready to give up. With Drax's intelligence and the combined efforts of human and defector technology, they had developed a bold plan. The humans would target the Zorkel's main flagship, the one from which Tyrus operated, and take it out once and for all. If they could cripple the Zorkel's command ship, Earth's resistance could cut off the head of the beast and sow confusion among the remaining Zorkel forces. But the plan was risky, too risky. If they failed, Earth would be left exposed, vulnerable to retaliation that could wipe out entire continents. Still, the alternative was even worse. Prolonged occupation and subjugation. Do you really think they'll surrender if we destroy Cyrus? Draxa asked, standing beside President McCarthy as the plan took shape. The former Zorkel officer had become invaluable, but even she understood the stakes. No, McCarthy replied, her tone unwavering. But if we take out Cyrus, the Zorkel will fracture. Their leadership will be thrown into chaos. They'll either retreat or fall into disarray. It's our best chance. With the plan in place, the resistance gathered every available asset. The human forces, along with Drax's defectors, launched a combined strike on a Zorkel communications hub in the Pacific, weakening the enemy's coordination just long enough for their specialized strike team to infiltrate Zorkel territory. The Resistance's newly repaired spacecraft, reverse-engineered from Zorkel wreckage, would carry the strike team into the heart of the Zorkel fleet, the flagship. As the team prepared for launch, one of the human pilots, a former civilian engineer named Lena, checked her gear one last time. She was the leader of the strike team, a position she had earned by demonstrating not only her technical brilliance, but an unshakable resolve. Earth's future was resting on her shoulders. The strike was set to occur at the same time as Cyrus's orbital bombardment. The humans would take advantage of the Zorkel's focus on destroying their cities to infiltrate and disable the flagship. But the clock was ticking. If they missed their window, they would be wiped out before they could even reach their target. With a final glance at her team, Lena nodded. Let's show them why they should never have underestimated us. Meanwhile, on the Zorkel flagship, Axirus was unaware of the impending threat. The bombardment was ready. The fleet was in position. His forces were prepared to crush Earth's resistance once and for all. But there was a moment of hesitation as Kyrus looked out over the vastness of space, his mind racing with the weight of the choices before him. Could he truly win this fight, or had he already lost? In the cold vastness of space, two very different forces were on the verge of colliding. A new chapter in the war was about to unfold, one where the fate of both Earth and the Zorkel Dominion would be determined. The strike team hurtled through space, the hum of their ship vibrating under their feet as the countdown clock ticked down. Lena gripped the control panel, eyes fixed on the blinking readouts. Every moment felt like an eternity. Their mission was simple in theory: infiltrate the Zorkel flagship, disable its command systems, and leave it crippled, unable to direct the fleet or carry out its bombardment. In practice, however, it was madness. The Zorkel flagship was an impenetrable fortress, and their assault team was just a handful of elite soldiers, armed with nothing but scavenged tech and a desperation that could rival the Zorkel's most advanced weapons. 5 minutes, Lena muttered under her breath, her pulse quickening. Behind her, the other members of the team were checking their equipment, their faces a mixture of determination and quiet dread. It was a one-way mission. If they failed, Earth's last chance for victory would die with them. As they neared the flagship, the vast, monolithic ship loomed before them like a metallic giant. A sea of Zorkel warships flanked it on all sides, ready to strike down any human vessel that dared approach. But for this team, there was no turning back. They had to move swiftly, strike before the Zorkel even knew they were there. Deploy cloaking devices, Lena ordered. The ship's systems hummed to life as the small, modified human vessel shimmered into invisibility, blending with the stars around it. They were now undetectable to the Zorkel fleet, but it wouldn't last long. They had minutes before the Zorkel sensors caught on to their presence. Lina's voice crackled through the comms. "We're almost in position. Everyone, stay sharp. Once we're inside, there's no more room for mistakes." The seconds ticked away. The flagship's defensive systems loomed larger, its surface bristling with energy shields and armed turrets. The plan had been to avoid detection entirely, but the closer they got, the clearer it became they'd need to fight their way in. "We're detected," one of the technicians aboard the ship muttered, his fingers flying over the control panel, activating evasive maneuvers. Before Lina could respond, the ship lurched as a barrage of Zorkel fire exploded against their shields. The cloaking system had failed, and the flagship's weapon systems had locked onto them. They were exposed. "Brace for impact," Lina shouted. The ship rocked violently, alarms blaring. The hull groaned under the pressure of the assault, and the lights flickered. But the team had one advantage: speed. They shot past the flagship's defenses, skimming its outer hull and diving toward an open docking bay just beneath its energy shields. With a deafening screech, the small craft made contact with the docking bay, sending out a shockwave that rattled every crew member to their core. Lina's heart pounded as she was thrown against her harness. "Get out, now," she ordered. The doors hissed open. The team leaped into action, weapons drawn, moving quickly through the dark corridors of the Zorkel flagship. They had minutes, maybe asterisk, before reinforcements arrived. Meanwhile, on the flagship's command deck, Xiris received the first of many reports. His eyes flickered over the holographic map of the fleet, his mind sharp, calculating. He'd expected the humans to make a desperate attempt, but not like this. The infiltration had taken him by surprise. "Commander, we have detected unauthorized entry," a subordinate reported, his voice strained. "Human forces have breached one of the docking bays. They're advancing toward the core." Xiris's fist slammed onto the table. "No one gets past this point." He turned to his tactical officer. "Prepare the response teams. If those humans make it to the heart of the ship, they'll cripple us." But even as he barked orders, something gnawed at him. He had seen humanity's resolve in action. It was like a fire, constantly flickering between desperation and brilliance. What was it about them that made them so stubborn, so unwilling to break? The answer, Xiris knew, was simple. They fought for survival. And in that moment, as the human strike team fought their way deeper into the ship, Xiris could feel the tide shifting. Not in favor of the Zorkel, but against them. The humans, for all their flaws, had tapped into something far greater than Xiris had ever realized. A will that could not be extinguished, no matter how much fire was thrown at it. Lina's team was on the move, and the reckoning had begun. Lina and her team moved quickly through the corridors of the Zorkel flagship, their boots pounding on the metallic floors as the alarms blared around them. The ship's interior was a maze of cold steel and alien architecture, and every corner felt like a potential death trap. Their mission was clear: get to the flagship's central command core, plant the charges, and disable the entire ship's systems before the Zorkel could regroup. But even as they made their way deeper into the heart of the enemy ship, the pressure mounted. The Zorkel forces were mobilizing, and the ship's automated defense systems began to kick in. Laser turrets emerged from the walls, and blast doors slammed shut, cutting off their paths. "We've got company," Lina shouted as she dove behind a pillar to avoid the incoming fire. Her squad quickly followed suit, returning fire with their weapons, which emitted the crackling hum of energy blasts. "We can't stay here," shouted Jonas, a former Special Forces operative and Lina's second-in-command. "The charges won't plant themselves." Lina nodded grimly. "We push forward, or we're all dead. Stay close." With a mix of military precision and raw determination, they moved through the corridors, taking down Zorkel soldiers one by one, their weapons more agile than the Zorkel's bulky, cumbersome armor. The human strike team's strength was their speed and resourcefulness, two qualities that made them a formidable opponent. But even they couldn't hold out forever. The Zorkel were adapting, countering their tactics, and reinforcements were closing in fast. As they approached the command center, Lena's heart raced. The map Draxa had provided them earlier had been their only guide, and they were now mere meters from their objective. But the countdown to the Zorkel bombardment had already begun. If they didn't disable the flagship soon, the entire planet would be destroyed before they even had a chance to win. "We're almost there," Lena breathed, sweat trickling down her brow. "Get ready to plant the charges." But just as they reached the final blast doors to the command center, a force unlike anything they had encountered stopped them in their tracks. A Zorkel officer, towering and armored in black, stepped into the hallway. Xeris himself. "You think you can defeat me?" Xeris's voice echoed in the vast space of the ship, his cold, alien eyes fixed on Lena with a terrifying intensity. "I've crushed empires, annihilated worlds, and yet you think you can break me with a handful of ragtag soldiers." Lena's grip tightened on her weapon, but she didn't flinch. "You've underestimated us from the start, Xeris. We don't fight for conquest. We fight for survival." Xeris sneered, his gauntleted hand reaching for a bladed weapon at his side. "Survival? You think that's enough? Let me show you what true power is." Without another word, he surged forward, moving faster than Lena had anticipated. His blade clashed with the energy pulses from Lena's squad, but he was unrelenting. The battle turned into a blur of flashing weapons, sparks flying, and the sound of grunts and gunfire filling the air. Lena and Xeris collided in a brutal fight, the human leader dodging his strikes with quick footwork and countering with her own precision attacks. The Zorkel leader was strong, immensely so, but Lena's resolve was stronger. Every strike she made wasn't just a blow at an enemy. It was a blow for Earth's future. "You can't win, Xeris roared, swinging his blade in an arc meant to decapitate her. But Lena was ready. In one fluid motion, she sidestepped, grabbed his arm, and twisted it, sending the blade flying from his grasp. The Zorkel leader staggered, surprised by the sudden turn of events, but it wasn't enough to break his will. With a final desperate movement, Lena disarmed Xeris and pinned him to the ground, holding him at gunpoint. "This is where it ends, Xeris," she said, breathing heavily. "Your empire, your fleet, they fall today. Not because we're stronger, but because we fight for something worth living for." Xeris's eyes glinted with defiance. "You think this changes anything? You are but insects in the grand scheme of the universe." Lena's gaze hardened. "Maybe. But today, we're the ones who decide who lives and who dies." As the final moments ticked away, Lena activated the detonation sequence. With Xeris's ship disabled, the rest of the Zorkel fleet would scatter in confusion. The bombardment was stopped, and the Zorkel forces would no longer be able to continue their assault. The Zorkel Dominion, once an unstoppable empire, had been brought to its knees, not by superior weapons or technology, but by the indomitable will of a species that refused to be enslaved. And as Lena watched the flagship's lights flicker and fade, she knew that Earth had won. Not just the battle, but the war. For humanity's future had been forged in fire, and no empire, however powerful, could extinguish it.